order, please. Judy, if you could do the roll.
Neil Butnick.
Here.
Judy Neville. Here. Tom Schulte.
Here.
Amy Carroll. Here. Todd Lavieri.
Here.
Michael Chen.
Here.
Chris Labrie.
Here.
Victor Alvarez. He's
Not here.
He was,
He may join late, but right now
All
it's not.
Maria Weingart. Here. Robert Hamill is online.
He's
Is
out.
that- Oh, he's out.
He's out. Can't make it.
Colin Dolphin.
Here.
All right, so. All right, Victor has to be, we have to seat, Colin.
It's common official.
He
Alternate?
is now.
So there you go. You're live.
So-
You're live.
So your first time we haven't had that.
Let me just tell you, I think one of Victor's first meetings was something, you know, he had to step up and vote on something right away. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so,
All right. So
all in favor? Motion to CCOM? All in favor? Aye, opposed? So now that we've seated you, let me introduce you.
Yeah, that was.
As our new alternate who replaced Victor, who replaced Chris, all because George left. That's our story. So in any event, welcome to the Board of Finance. I'm glad you're here, and we'll get you up to speed over the next several weeks, and we look forward to your input and your help and support. We have a busy year. I know the last two have been quiet. Linda knows, and Tom. Not a lot to do, but this year we'll be busy with all the things that we have on our agenda for the year. Hopefully a library, probably a police station. We've got ARPA funds to work on, budgets and all the rest of it. So we've got a very, 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 very busy year ahead of us. Okay, so let's see. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Neil, no one liked the minutes? No one read the minutes?
Somebody read our minutes.
Amy is a second. All in favor? Opposed?
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't.
That's
Yeah.
perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Okay. Okay, first order, Linda, if you could walk us through the change in the approval, special appropriation for the Carriage Barn Art Gallery project. There we go.
So the Carriage Barn is a project that was approved in this fiscal year for $123,000. We've subsequently received a $50,000 grant donation from the New Society for the Arts. And therefore what we're asking is a special appropriation to increase the budget so we can spend the $50,000. And then we would also be asking you to accept the donation of $50,000.
Anyone have any questions for Linda? It's pretty straightforward. Sounds pretty good.
Can you just remind me, when we approved the budget, we approved it expecting the grant, right? So
We
we're not
did.
ch- So we're not changing the overall cost, we think we're just recognizing, right?
We were expecting the grant, but we didn't know what the total amount was, so we did not include the grant in the total budget, but we were expecting it to come. So we approved it $50,000 short. And so that's why we're increasing it by $50,000 because we now have the funding.
So no real change in the cost of the project.
No.
Any other questions? Okay, a motion to approve the special appropriation increase. Tom, second, Chris, all in favor? Aye, opposed, none?
Thank you.
Tiger, where are you? Buddy, we miss you. We would.
Hybrid meetings are designed to allow Tiger to stay out.
He's got an inner
Figured that.
track there. He's attending 2 meetings.
Yeah, he's got the other one.
Planning and zoning on.
Yeah.
Yeah, they line up today.
Okay. Thank you. All right, first selectman.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone in person again for our second in-person meeting. And I would remind everyone that when you do in-person meetings, you're supposed to now under the new rules, take roles by name. So you're supposed to come work formality by the votes.
You mean, so Judy's not just supposed to read the name? What do you mean?
You're supposed to say.
Each time?
Each time.
Unless it's unanimous.
Unless it's unanimous, actually, that's a good point.
They were all unanimous. I think we covered it. We knew that.
And anybody who's, you have to notify now who's the.
So not the roll, but on the
Yeah,
votes,
yeah.
we need to do votes by name if it's not unanimous. Okay. all right.
Because some people could be on by public. and they can.
So you mean with each, just with the roll call or with each motion on the entire agenda?
Any vote.
Any
Any
vote,
vote.
okay.
If it's not unanimous.
Good
But
tip.
you're still allowed to, you can seat somebody and then make the motion and then vote, or that's still okay? All right,
That's how you vote.
all right.
And these rules are in effect until next April unless they change it.
And is Zoom going to be allowed for some people from home? Or
Yes.
is that
That's a hybrid.
for all of us or just for elected?
Not you.
I mean, for all town bodies?
All town bodies, all
No,
town
that's what I meant. All town bodies or just us, all town bodies.
Look, it's a nice thing. At the end of the day, someone can't get out or
Yeah.
something going on, they can dial in. It's terrific. But I mean, I think the expectation, most of us will come when you can because it works. But as I said to Victor, just because you can dial in from Rhode Island doesn't mean you should dial in from Rhode Island. So,
So I just have a few items on COVID. We have very minimal cases weekly. We have 4 or 5. Those that we have are people that are traveling and they may be getting the Delta variant. We don't know. They don't report to us. The Delta variant, nor do they report it to the person. So they keep track of it.
oh, they,
Yeah, the state-
so they know, but the person may not.
Right. And so some people who have been vaccinated are sick and but not sick enough to go to the hospital. And, we are still vaccinating at the Pine Cottage. Anyone who wants to get a vaccination, we have all three vaccinations and we encourage haven't been vaccinated to go and get a free vaccination in town. We had a good selectmen's advisory committee meeting yesterday with Amy for her first meeting. Placing George, and we reviewed the solar project at West. West is done, but not yet activated. Saks is in motion, but not yet completed. And we discussed the plans for the high school when it was completed. And we also reviewed plans for the CHP and for this building and for the Latin Center, which we hope the town hall. The gas is coming in a few weeks. Town hall, and but we want to get gas to Latin Center. That by the fall rounds. And then we talked about where we begin to plan CSP for high school. The Playhouse, we don't have a plan yet, but we're going to come. If you have a special meeting in August, perhaps we'll have a plan for August, but we are doing a more detailed plan about capital improvements that are required for ADA and other reasons to bring the building back into operation.
It kept on that with the Playhouse. So I think it's 2 meetings ago, we approved the money to move forward with basically the roof project.
Roof has
right?
been budgeted already, so
Right.
that's going to be done.
Right.
We actually delayed that because of the immediate need once they closed the building.
Right.
The police department building committee met last Thursday and reviewed the architect's plan for renovation as new for that building. The budgeted amount was in the $15–16 million range, and now the possibility of entertaining a new building in another location is something we are discussing as to how we are to proceed with that decision, whether it's town bodies, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, Town Council. But we have the other architect prepared to make a recommendation there. We want to do that. So
Can we bring that discussion to September's meeting? Does that work?
Well, I guess, Kevin,
I actually
so,
would, I'd actually like to try to do it in August with the town bodies if we can. But I think that we need to move along to the decision with which we're going.
because the committee, this building committee in place to evaluate current location and options there.
Well, the building committee is there to manage a project once we decide where we're going.
Okay, but in terms of reporting out, in terms of the potential alternative sites, which is what you're talking
Right.
about, I mean, it has to be done in context of what the options might be at the
Sure.
current site.
Sure.
So is that coming to,
I think that's more going to be the Board of Selectmen making a recommendation to the Board of Finance and the town council.
it's not gonna be in
If
conjunction
we
with-
do it at all, I mean, it's, now that we've seen the cost and the plan, we have to really decide, should we look at an alternative at all?
Sure, it's a cost benefit analysis.
Cost benefit and it's there's really not too many other locations to look at. But there's a certain feeling that a new building could be desirable for reasons, but you have to weigh the two. And ultimately, if we decide on a new building, that'll go back to the building committee to build the building.
Just back one step though, replace or the repair or renovation of this building, just about 50 to 60.
Right.
Do we have
No,
a,
no.
Including,
It's gonna be, that had a lot of things that might not be, it didn't necessarily have, depending on what you did, just moving in and out.
oh, it is what it is. I don't mean, it's,
No, no, no,
we
it
have
is. It's, I think it's a positive number, because I think a lot of us would think maybe 20, and we might end up there, but I think we think 20 would be best.
well, I'm just saying, we have some number range of something for that option. Do we have a build new?
Bill
Ballpark
New is probably in the $23-24 million range.
And without land costs. There's some.
Okay.
Well, the premise is we wouldn't do anything other than on town property, and we had a choice of a dozen properties, and
Okay.
we don't,
We all have issues.
most of have issues.
Well, you answered the question though. If the delta is that big,
Well, but then it's a question of what we can sell South Avenue for development. Sure. So,
that's
I mean, Stanford built a new police department, Newtown built a new police department, they still have their old police department building, trying to decide what to do with it.
Exactly.
So,
well, that's
I
right.
think
That's not a
this is-
no-brainer.
Yeah, this is positive. I think this is good news. And
Yeah.
I don't think people want to sell these buildings. I think this is really a good start.
But it is like the building stuff, it is
Yeah.
preliminary at this point, but I would say it's, I think many of us on the walk away going, because a couple of years ago when they talked about it, it was like, nah, you're not gonna be able to get everything you can. It seems very much that we can get pretty much 100% what you need for police department. And a building that would be considered renovated as new, not a partial
Right,
building.
right.
So one that gives you 50 years, and that's, I think, the important
Exactly.
That's a good
consideration in
point.
that, and then you keep the facade and everything. So,
Well, and it can get done.
right,
yes,
The
and it's
assumption
time
that that could be sold and developed is, who knows?
well, anyway,
There's,
It's right next to the ambulance corps and the whole thing was well planned. You know, everybody's used to working together, emergency.
It can be
management.
done.
It's
the only
good.
point.
It's all good.
Okay, that sounds like a positive step, but I'm not sure what August is. What is the discussions for August?
well, I'd like to keep it moving along. I mean, if we're gonna be meeting, we probably will,
But what would
the selectmen are involved in it enough to perhaps make a recommendation. But then it'll come to you and come to the town council, or we'll maybe meet together and try to decide. It's unclear how we got to do it.
Okay, but we ought to, and we could start that now, putting together the questions we would have around the process, just like we do with the library. What we need and any things that need to be done so that we can get it done. Okay.
Number 5, we have the Southview Lane cell tower is under construction, and the Ponus Ridge Road cell tower is moving forward. I hope that that's the siting count for the end of the summer. And again, the carriers are remarkably interested in multiple locations, which is good news. The ARPA funds will have was on your agenda. We had an interesting forum last night. The sense about ARPA funds is they're supposed to be to help remediate COVID damage to the community, and that not just the governmental side, which is really the function of this body, town council, but also the community. And so we had nonprofits and the business community last night give us comments. That was the beginning of a process that will take weeks to decide should we be allocating funds to the non-governmental side, and what should we do with the governmental side?
Yeah, well, today, what we're really going to do, don't mean to cut you off, but we have to understand the process. Step 1 was to prove that we own the money, we earn the money, and we deserve the money. Step 2 was to get the money. So those 2 steps are done, some of it. And then the third is, what's the process? And the rules are very specific and very strict, and this body needs to know what is inbounds, out of bounds, gray zone questions. So we're nowhere on making a decision about anything or having our input on the decision at this point.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly. And then finally, the library, we know the P&Z is meeting tonight, we'll probably take a vote tonight. And it looks like there's going to be a preservation element to that, which the town will be expected to participate in financially. So I think we will soon have a discussion about that.
Okay. And just because they're meeting, we're not having any commentary. Okay, any questions for Selectman? Do I need to call you by your name?
No.
Formality.
Judy Neville, what were your questions? All right. I'm sorry. Anything else for?
No, that's it.
Okay. Linda?
Sure. So just, was it?
We're anxious to see how we wrapped up.
Yeah,
our
well,
year.
it's still, fairly preliminary, but I think we have a sense of where we are. So in your packets, there were, I sent you two documents, financial documents. The first one is the year-to-date revenue comparisons, which is looking at the tax revenues. And I've been sharing this, I believe I started in March. And so just kind of showing where we are. And so we're pretty much close to the end of the year. We have some trickle revenue that's still coming in that we'll book towards FY21. But for the most part, we've booked pretty much everything that we're going to get in terms of property taxes. And so as you can see, the last update we had, which was around end of June 39th, we had collected about 101% of our total property tax revenues, which is consistent with our collection rate of about 99.5% collection rate. So there are no elements of concern as far as the tax revenues. I know initially when we began the year, we weren't sure with a deferment program how that was going to impact revenues, but it has had minimal impact on us. The second page I have is just looking at the line items of expenditures and revenues townwide, taking into account all revenues. So the first page are the expenditure side of the equation, and we break it down by the different elements. But you'll see that the total numbers at the bottom, we had a combined total revised budget of about 155.7 million. Year to date, this was mid-July, July 7th, we were at 151.6. Our projections for the end of the year is about 154.8. The big driver there, obviously, is, and I've had discussions with Joanne on the Board of Ed, where they're coming in with COVID. They're coming in under this year. Preliminary estimates are they'll come in somewhere between 1 million and 1.2 million under, but we're waiting to see what that final number is. It may fluctuate slightly, but there will be some savings from that. But you'll recall that we did do special appropriations for the Board of Ed early in the year. 1.9 for the operating, 1.5 for the operating, and 1.9 for their internal service. So although they're coming in under, but once you add it all up, it is a net increase over the revised budget as a result of those special appropriations. And as far as the revenues are concerned, I kind of shared with you initially, the big driver is the property tax revenue that's coming in as we anticipated. Year to date, we are probably looking at a fund balance drawdown this year, which was planned, of about 4.5 to 4.8 million in this fiscal year, largely driven by the two special appropriations for the Board of Ed, because they total almost $3.2 million a year. So that's the big driver of that drawdown. You'll recall that when we approved the budget, we approved a much higher drawdown of the fund balance, excluding the special appropriation to the Board of Ed. So once you take the Board of Ed out of the equation, you're actually looking at a drawdown of under $1 million on a budget where we approved almost $5 million drawdown. And so again, that's consistent with what we anticipated at the beginning of the year. So I think it's positive. This does not include, as we'll talk about in the next subject and the next agenda item, the rescue plan funds. Those have not been booked into the general fund. They're booked into a grant fund. And so we've received just under $3 million, and we'll receive another $3 million next year. But that's separate from what you're seeing here, because we've not booked those into the general fund until a decision is made on how to appropriate those funds. So I think overall it's positive. It's good. It's a good story. We are where we anticipated we would be for the year, and given the two special appropriations for education coming in at where we're coming in, I believe we've done well this year.
Question on the 1.9 operating for the Board of Ed, was how much of that, if not all, was offset by COVID refunds or?
Of the 1.9, I believe the last time Joanne reported in that fiscal year, they got about just under $500,000 in CARES.
And any more expected for that? I need to offset that.
Yeah, because the way that the Board of Ed works is they have other funding that comes in, not through the general fund, through their grant funds. And so what they've been doing is identifying the grant funding that comes in if there are other expenses that they could apply to. So right now they've identified about 400,000 of expenses that could be applied towards the 1.9. They do have some additional funding that's coming in as part of this rescue plan. They have a separate allocation. The program is called ESSER grants, elementary, supplemental. But there's some additional funding that's coming to the Board of Ed, about $1.2 million, 1.3 million. That's separate from the 1.9 that we provided. So they're going to go through that and see what can be applied towards the 1.9. So there's additional funding that could be applied towards the 1.9 from the
Where
rescue.
was that booked when it came out? I mean, where
The-
do we see that on all this, on the 1.9 of the 500,000 so far?
The 400,000, we will see that at the end when they reconcile, because that funding comes in directly to the Board of Ed.
Oh, it
And so when we
does.
gave them the 1.9, it was a drawdown to meet their expenses. And so when we reconcile, they'll say, of the 1.9, we received 400,000, and so we only needed 1.5. And some of that rolls over into next year. If you recall, when we were doing the budget for next year, they had some anticipated expenses that they were going to ask for special appropriation for this fiscal year 22, but they held back because they wanted to reconcile some of these fundings as they were coming in. And so I believe of the 1.9, there's probably about $180,000 or so to be spent of the 1.9 that they're appropriated. But they'll be coming back, I believe, in August or September to provide an accounting of how that was done.
And that includes the free maintenance and the operating, all the cleaning, and additional, it's all of that we talked about.
I mean, just to look at year-over-year budgeting, they ended up in the prior year budget with a $2 million savings against expenses when they had to close down school and savings, right? So,
Right.
So basically, the end of last year, they came in $2 million below expenses, and then functionally back up forward to this year
To this year.
offset. Neutral circumstances. Right?
Correct.
It's kind of, if you look year over year, it's kind of like a wash.
Correct.
And then,
That's what I was trying to
yeah, and
figure
within,
out.
and within that
Exactly, yeah.
wash, it's even kind of a positive because you're getting CARES money
Correct.
to offset it.
Correct.
We're kind of financially we're almost ahead of the game with some.
We are, because last year they came in under 2 million and we almost gave it back
Yeah,
for
but then
this
we're
fiscal
getting it
year.
back.
But then they're getting something back, and then this year again, they're coming in under that about 1.2, 1.3 as well.
Let me just want to make sure clear. So we will end up spending about $1 million, $900,000 less from a expenditure. Right, if I read the columns right, 155.7 million, 155, 744 million, right? And it looks like you're coming in, you're saying at 154,829.
Correct, budget to actual.
Yes, okay, so. Good. And that includes the $1.2 million or $1 million from the underspend of the board? Yes. $1 million, we don't know.
It's about 70, 81, about $1.1 million.
$1 million. Okay, that's what you have here.
That's what I have.
Okay, all right, okay. Okay, and on the revenues, said it looks like we'll do about 2 million.
Correct.
All right,
That's right. So 147.7 to about 149.
so that's how you get to a 1 million drawdown.
Right.
2 million more revenue, 1 million less expense.
And so the
Out
net.
of 4 million-ish, and you're down to $1 million drawdown. Gotcha. That takes us from 28.5. Looks like, well, this is 27. So it would be $1.5 million. Is that right? Looking at the balance available in the 2021 column projections.
Right, so you're looking at the 31.4 to
Okay.
29.9
Right.
total.
But
So,
in the revenue over, better revenue.
Yeah, 1.5.
Is the 1.5% that we
Right,
conservatively budgeted. That's a big chunk of that.
so our fund balance is down 1.5. It's not, I said 4 million, but it's really 4.5 million. So the 2 and the 1 are 3, and you got $1.5 million left, and that's what the following.
Right.
Okay, so I'll have a fund of around 30 million, and we were thinking we would be at 26. Start. the year, is that-
No, so with the 29 million and the budget that we approved this year with the drawdown, we've budgeted to end June 30, 2022 at 26.1.
Right, but we have more of a balance.
Correct.
Right.
And given our spending trends and the revenue trends, that 26.9 is the budget number will come in higher than that.
Very good. Okay, good, excellent. Any questions for Linda? So good job, everybody, and to you as well. I mean, all the town departments and managed through a lot of questionable, expectations. It's going to happen, spending and everything else. So good job.
We'll just put a finer point on it. So that 26 that we projected, you're saying historically the way things would normally be sort of trending expenditures, though we would likely come out ahead of that 26.
Correct.
And now we're starting at a more favorable place.
Correct.
Right. So that the odds of us getting.
So this year is an anomaly in that we have spent more than we brought in, but because of those special appropriations for education and whatnot. Next year, this year that we're going into is more of a traditional year to where we don't see that variance between spending and revenue. We're going to traditionally continue to over collect with our collection rates, and we're probably going to come in within budget or under budget as we historically do. And so that 26 billion number that we end with is going to be higher at the end of the year.
Any other questions on financials for the year? Very good. Do you want to go through this for anything, the comparisons, or that was just for us?
No, I actually started off with that.
Yeah, I don't get it. What else you want to say about it? Okay. Okay, and then if there's nothing else, item 6, this is just to get us an understanding of what the rules are and the guidelines as we know them in terms of what we can and can't do with the ARPA fund. And also the Board of Education got $1 million.
About $1.1 million.
What is that? They have guidelines as well.
They have guidelines as well in terms of what they can spend it on. It's not to be used for same rules as on the government as on the town side. Primarily not to be used for reimbursements, to be used for new projects, getting the schools ready to open, whatever they need to do with the buses and the bathrooms and social distancing, whatever requirements will exist at the time based on the guidelines going into the new school year, so they could use those funds for those types of activities.
Okay, I don't know where you want to start. I'm sure there's a million questions, but why don't you give us sort of what you know now, and then we have a lot of questions. I have some about that as well.
So when we met in June, I gave you an update of the funding had just been approved. The state had received some funding, and our total allocation, we got the final number was going to be 5.9. At the time, I shared that they were going to split it in 2 installments. We were going to get one by June 30th, and then the second installment this fiscal year. We did receive 2.9 million June 25th of June of this year, similar to where around the time most towns got there. So we do have that just about $3 million received of the 6. I shared with you the eligible uses of the funding. You could apply them to support any public health expenditures, address any negative economic impacts that are due to COVID, public health emergencies. We talked about replacing lost revenue on the governmental side. You can actually do incentives for essential workers. And Kevin and I were talking about this. You recall that last year you approved the volunteer tax abatement, as an example, abatement for our first-time responders. So those would be the types of things that you could use this funding for, to pay for those types of things or any other new initiatives that we decided to include for this fiscal year. And then you can also invest it in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure as far as I have to check. I'm not sure what elements of solar you could use it for.
Invest more for their capital development, solar to do PA's roads.
Yeah.
Like what about the library?
like funding, I don't believe so. Unless you could make the argument that the library is some type of economic development, downtown development, then you could.
Yes.
I forwarded to everybody an article about 2 weeks ago, about how Stanford's spending their money. They're doing every single penny for infrastructure. And it's going to be a long-term benefit to the entire community. And they won't have to raise as much tax records. So they have a lot of remediation in their schools for roofs and mold and stuff like that. And and unanimous, that's how they're spending.
They probably have.
So-
I'm sure it's a great way to use it, right? Yeah.
Cell tower?
Yes, cell tower.
Yeah, cell tower is included, actually. Judy and I were looking at that the other day.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, I have a bigger idea than that, but we'll get there.
So I did provide for you, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion among the chief executives, finance officers, and so CCM, Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, put together a toolkit, which kind of summarized a 20-page document, really easy to read. So I included that in your agenda backup, but it does provide some good material in terms of overview of the program, what the program is intended to do, what you could do. But I think the key thing is just, as Kevin alluded to earlier, is developing a process. I think that's kind of where we are, is identifying what process are we going to use as a community to spend the money, because I think what you can spend it on categories are pretty clear. I think what's not clear is each community is going to make a decision. Like you said, Stanford is going on infrastructure, some are doing learning replacement. Some of the urban communities are applying it to urban issues, addressing urban blight or disparities, and so forth, to the extent that those communities have them. But it is going to be like a community by community discussion and process based on the elements of each community. So,
Our last night's forum was co-sponsored by the TDEC committee, of which Dr. Chairman, and also the Community Foundation and the Chamber of Commerce.
Some good input.
Because, nobody knows the nonprofit better than the Community Foundation. There's no question there has been impact of COVID, both individuals, businesses, but also to nonprofits. So we have to evaluate whether those are. The real question is, how do you evaluate? A lot of the nonprofits took PPP and stayed in business. So it's a lot to study. But we had some people get up last night and have some very interesting proposals as to what they can do in town to address human needs.
I think one question that always comes up is, are those embedded costs for the future or one-time costs? Infrastructure, that's a paving road, you're done. Cell tower, you're done. Those are one-time. They're not adding to the cost base. I think that's something that we have to think about.
I think the rule of thumb for one-time type of revenues is using for one-time spend, not recurring, because then you have to make up for that.
Now, you keep on saying cell tower. I actually proposed to AT&T that we would finance their equipment. They said no one's ever proposed that. So they don't. And then when I tried to own half of the tower, or own the poles at the Forest Ridge, the tower says we don't want to do that. So they have they operate in a certain mode as to what they promise their investors. And that's how they want to do it. On the other hand, we could say, for example, with the cell tower, we won't take on town property. We won't take it rent. That waive rent. Normally, people waive rent for 10 years as an incentive to get to the tower. So that's a way we could incentive.
Okay. I think that's a good guideline that you mentioned, though, just as a fundamental, one-time grants are good for one time. That's a very smart.
But some of the recommendations last night were things we've talked about for years. The generator is an example. I mean, these are things that have either been postponed or, we considered, but we haven't.
We're on our capital plan. We ought to.
But but it is a one-time. A lot of those were
And health
one-time.
and safety.
That's right.
Yeah.
And certainly qualified. Yeah,
The YMCA was renovated without a generator,
that's right.
and it's nice to have that in the shelter, the event of emergencies. So we talked to them about having CHP that also would function as a generator in emergency. So you're not down. That facility would not only be self-sustaining, but also would be an emergency facility. So
And that we've talked about for 15 years at least. It's like overdue and good idea.
So the one thing you mentioned was covered lost revenues. which we have and documented and obviously had to submit. So my question is, what's the process for making decisions? And how, and who's responsible for what on this? What's the town council's role, if any? What's our role, if any? What's your role in the selectman's office, if any? Again, I don't know the rules and the process and the
Well,
guidelines.
there is no specific process. Each town decides. There is on the other hand, the guidance the lawyers give it is it's the legislative body decision. So I think the selectmen, as the boots on the ground, will study and make recommendations. I think you particularly are concerned about governmental needs based upon your review of capital budgets every year. And I think that at the end of the day, I believe, and the board of the town council may decide to do their own evaluation as to what the needs are. So, but it is mainly a legislative body decision.
So you want recommendations from the Board of
Yeah,
Finance?
it's governmental.
Specific recommendations, so.
Yeah.
What, okay.
Well, wouldn't it be procedural recommendations?
Well,
Or are you coming up with like, oh, let's brainstorm?
Well, yeah, brainstorm on the governmental side. For example, one of the governmental needs that would be an impact would be the, everybody believes we should rehabilitate the playhouse and maintain a movie theater. That's probably not going to cost.
I would not say 1%.
Well,
No, I wouldn't.
I don't think people do.
No, I don't think so.
But I do think everyone thinks we need to renovate the police department,
true.
right? And that serves everybody. I mean, I think the one
Yeah,
thing
but
is
does that
to
count?
make this benefit
where's
everybody.
that, what's the economic value?
Yeah.
Of that? I hear you.
Yeah, to the extent that it's enhancement to public safety and first responders, could make the argument
I mean, if
that,
we're gonna build in extra space, people that need,
Right.
certain stuff like that, are very possible.
So I'm guessing, but I don't know, Tom, you got your question answered, but my question was more, I think this group would like to provide input to you and the town council on things that might be a priority around infrastructure, some of the things that are a long-term capital plan, governmental. as
Well,
you said.
for example, say if your analysis said instead of where we are, we have a big hole in our budget, we would be looking to address the hole in our budget. We don't have a hole. Doesn't mean
Well,
we don't.
We
have-
lost revenue.
True.
We
But
lost
on a
revenue.
top line basis, we did.
Well,
Conveyance.
for 2 years, for this budget, and the end of the last budgets.
Yeah.
End of the last budget, we lost revenue. Don't forget.
Right.
And then in this budget, revenue, we did lose revenue. Now, you could say other things helped out, but who knows that they wouldn't have anyway.
You
So
can
we
make the
still lost
argument.
revenue. That's a fact.
For example, we transferred some of the parking revenues to the parking fund. We didn't do that this year because the revenue was down. Right. So the parking fund has a whole, and there's a sense we probably need more business parking downtown as opposed to commuter parking for obvious reasons. So
I want to be clear, what is our best role for this process? I appreciate the first inning.
brainstorming as to what the governmental needs are. And town council, I think, would do the same thing.
Okay, and I think timing feels like
We'll have this same conversation next Wednesday.
90 days. I mean,
Yeah.
kind of 90-day window.
Actually, what did the auditor say? They want to know a plan by the
right, because when I spoke to Joe, our auditor, the beginning of this month, was one of the things that they would like to know is a sense of what the town plans to do, because that has an impact on the testing that they do on the funding. So for example, if we decided that we're going to allocate this to lost revenues, then they would be looking at analyzing these lost revenues. We talked about the parking revenues and the recreation revenues because the parks were shut down. So if we decide that that's what we're going to do, then they will come and test those types of revenues. If we say, for example, we want to apply towards a police facility or whatever, they would want to know to the extent to which have we met the criteria of the program, because that dictates what the types of things that they're going to do as far as testing.
But their timing can't be faster than 90 days.
No, I mean, they typically don't, they get done with the audit in November-ish, and therefore if there's some direction where we're going by then, but we do have until 2024 to spend the funding. We don't have to spend it, but we do have to come up with some type of plan, because the 2024 is when you have to have completed the spending and submitted the documentation for it.
The federal grant funds, they're subject to audit.
They
That's what the auditors, of course.
Yep, okay.
But Linda, so it's somewhat fungible because we do have demonstrated loss revenues, right? Okay, so to the extent, let's say $2 million, whatever it is, okay, we could easily give the information for that, okay? And then, the fact that it comes in toward the general fund, we still can then apply it to, with less restrictions on, we can still get to the
Right.
same goal.
Because once you've identified, let's say $2 million, $2 million is lost revenue and you've met that,
Check off.
you've checked it off. What you do with the $2 million is back to your regular appropriation process of $2 million.
When they analyze lost revenue, is it by category? Will they look simply at parking? Mark revenue and say, oh yes, totally there's a loss here. Or are they gonna turn around and say, but you have like these conveyance fees that come way up and so on that basis?
They would have anyway. We still lost the revenue. The
So the
revenue-
way-
So that's what I'm
right.
asking, are they gonna look at it?
So the way the GFOA analyzes and they've actually prepared a revenue estimate calculator, it is by line, not by total. And therefore you would estimate, for example, and they've actually thrown in now interest income. Initially wasn't part of it, but they revised it. And interest income also qualifies. You could justify that because of the
Yes, and
economy.
money.
Right. But it is line by line. And therefore you could say, we lost parking revenue regardless of what happened to conveyance. That's how GFOA, and that's how their revenue estimate calculator looked at it. You plug in the line item, you look at 3 years historical, there's an inflation factor of 4.1% for each. And then you compare your forecast to actual, and that's how you calculate your loss revenue at the line item level.
With movie theater lost revenue.
It would.
It did.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, movie theater is definitely one of them. I mean, they shut down and
Discussion.
Pool being closed. Tough.
the pool, the recreation, parking, all of those are.
Some would argue that movie theater,
Actually, the pool wasn't closed. We actually had a successful year last year.
Yeah, other rec programs are closed.
So you could put together.
Wait, hang on. Chris was, Neil was making.
yeah, my point still is that this movie theater, many people say that's not a fundamental. I think twice before, we've got plenty of great places to put it. Movie theater, making an argument is conference development. Stretch for me. So I don't want to go on, I think before we do a movie theater, thing, we need to know about stuff like competition. What the building's gonna be, what did they react, what did they learn? I haven't heard any of that.
I
So I
haven't
just-
either.
So I just want to put it up as
That's
a
right.
string of flag, like, please take note.
And what else we're going to do with it if this doesn't prevail? I mean, that's not.
But I
that's
think
not-
Amy's point is a good one, which is if in fact our sort of authorization or justification is because it's to replace lost revenue, then we don't have to force that square peg to go around the hole, right? Then it's just whatever we would normally do for our appropriation. And then we would have the same thing we would ever have about the playhouse.
Well, you could do both. You could have
Right,
that
exactly.
lost revenue, and that is what it is, and then there's a debate about the.
Right.
Well, two separate things.
Chris, did you have a point?
Well, I was just to say that do we know how much an aggregate lost revenues would cover the funds?
Yes, actually included in your packet. I did as initial analysis last year, and I think we came up with about 3.1 million. And I just took the recreation department because of the programs, parking revenue in the general fund. And then I did include, property rental, movie theater, the revenues that we get from those. We provided some grace to our tenants and whatnot. So we summed all of that up, and based on the calculator and the 4.1%, it's about $3 million.
So about half is already covered. a little more than that.
If we chose to appropriate it towards
That's
that.
the
Right.
way to prove it.
Right.
We don't even have to argue for this.
Right. And then once you get the 3 million, you decide how to spend the 3 million without the strings of the funding.
Then the second 2 million and a half or whatever it is, that's gonna be a little bit more, do more justification.
Correct.
And again, I think you go with the most easily justifiable items.
There's plenty of things to qualify. Health.
Right.
Yeah, but the second batch, do we have to actually then spend it? Or is it just, again, a demonstration that there's been this need, we've already. spent
No.
money, we're gonna reimburse?
No, so it's not, the only reimbursable piece is the revenue. Everything else is actually new programs. I mean, the goal is to stimulate the economy.
And I think the
Right.
audit is the catch-all. You don't have to resubmit anything. You just have to say, oh, I took this $1 million because I lost revenue, and okay, that's fine. Or I took this and I put it, right? That's how it works. Okay. Can I make a suggestion? By the way, I don't mean to end the question. We can keep asking Linda questions, but I think where this might end, the best thing for us is to form a small ad hoc committee, just to have people gather the input from this group on what it is that we'd like to recommend to, in terms of the, how things get allocated to you, I guess, in the selectman's office and the town council, given our view of this. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I'll ask for volunteers, or you guys can just email me with your Marine's hand shot. Okay, I'm gonna do this. Could you maybe just, Maria, I appreciate that, so yes, but I'd be more than happy to just take an email if you're willing to volunteer. And I'd like to create three people. I think a committee of 3 is enough. And we'll come back to this group, if that subcommittee, ad hoc committee could do that, come back and provide all that summary of input. We'll package it up and we'll get it to the other bodies. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just throw out here, when we're talking about infrastructure, whether it's this first 3 million or the second 3 million, why aren't we doing more? And I know there's a meeting tomorrow night, we've talked about this, but fiber optics as opposed to other infrastructure. I mean, I can't believe we had a few $1 million to throw in if the providers wouldn't all jump in. And there's, what, a third of the town that's not covered? And it's clean, it's safe, it's health, it's all of the issues we're talking about tonight. And I think it's time. It's progressive, it's fast forward, it's a community, widespread community. I mean, that's, I think, really worth
Are you
looking
talking,
into.
are you talking about competitor to Optimum? Or are you
Oh.
talking,
Yes.
Oh, please.
Or maybe they could up their game. I mean, they certainly could be a,
well, Tucker and the,
There's
is
a
studying
meeting, I
with
know,
with
she is.
the problems that Altice has. Altice has wired the entire town with fiber, and Frontier has 45% of town wired with fiber. Both of them are incompetent marketers of their service. Although Altice would tell us they've had now to make many customers on fiber, and that is their goal, convert their coaxial cables over fiber. But other towns are not wired yet, and they're getting the same level of service with the coaxial cable copper that we get, spotty and
but would this
problematic.
not push that
Well,
along?
again,
I mean, if we funded,
So they're actually talking about doing that, as towns around the country have done it.
Oh,
They build community-owned.
a lot.
We finance some of them. Yes.
Right,
But
the point is,
yeah.
it makes more sense to get the guy who's in town that can provide a service, to provide good service. That's what we're working on with Altice, as to why can't you provide good service? Rather than us getting into the economic realm of trying to compete with them and provide a service that they're perfectly capable of doing, but they don't do it well.
It's typically done in really rural communities when you don't have anybody else step up.
I know, but if we made an investment and we had ownership and we took a more deliberate, maybe more deliberate effort, I should say, why would that not be to our favor? Why would that not move the process?
Well, the question might be is, I don't know what the cost would be,
Well,
and would it, whatever we could give them be meaningful enough to move the needle and
Well,
actually
that's
do
what we
something
got.
and not waste it.
Well, we do have a technology advisory committee that's working on this, and their view has been, it's not very wise to go into the business yourself to compete with private companies. In a place like, it's better to try to get them to do what they can do better. Because the town's wired already, just provide the service you're capable of providing.
But how do we move the dial? I mean,
Tucker, you're,
Yeah, we're working with them. I mean,
I know
we've had
you
a couple
are,
of
yeah.
sessions with their infrastructure folks. We actually call them monthly calls. We have their business development people on another call. Right now, we have a series of questions out to them. A, all the articles about why they're slowing the speeds down. More importantly, when they're gonna get all this fiber going. And our government relations person, I work with her, I talk to her almost every day about outages and that kind of thing. So tomorrow night, technology advisor, and this is the number 2 agenda item to discuss.
It's on Zoom.
Okay, other questions for now, for Linda?
In terms of the advisory, subcommittee,
Mhm.
rather than just throw out like ideas, I think part of it is how we, kind of a philosophy of how we should, use this money. And in my own advice is that you should do it the greatest good for the most people and not be picking winners and losers. and do something that's a long-term investment that benefits everybody. So as opposed to just throwing out this project, this project, this project, kind of what, this is kind of like a gift, right?
Correct.
This is, mind you, we're all gonna pay for it eventually. But just in terms of kind of, almost like a philosophical approach, of how best to deploy this for the most people in town. And when you get into like certain nonprofits, they all do great stuff, and they're different people's passions and concerns. And so how do you balance, not just picking this guy gets it, this guy doesn't get it type of thing, versus something to do that benefits everybody in town, and it could be from a safety perspective, so that's just.
Well, I'm suggesting that the committee gather everybody's input, come back to this group with the thoughts, input, and suggestions. So I think we'll get a few bites at the apple to get that input. But we want to do it by September. I think that's what I'm hearing. Yep. Okay. Other questions? Thanks, Ann. Okay. Okay, thank you for that. We have an approval and a review, and then I've got one little housekeeping item on.
Sure. So the first one, transfers are the approval of the transfers, and this is a process we do at the beginning of each fiscal year. As you know, when we adopt the budget, we have contingency funding that we set aside for collective bargaining units and non-union employees and so forth. So we had this year, we have 3 collective bargaining agreements that have yet to be settled. And then we also have the non-union employees that is decided by the first selectman. So the first batch is just approving transfers from contingency into the individual department budgets for the non-union employees. Salary adjustments for fiscal year 22 and their corresponding social security payments. So these are funds that are budgeted, they were in contingency, and so this is the first transfer that we're making, and then we'll come back to you once the union negotiations are complete with that calculations and what those are. But this does require approval because it is moving funds from contingency.
Any questions or points of clarification on this one?
I'm sorry, I'm getting on that.
Sure.
So these salaries are the reflected salaries for people, jobs, or when they, whatever. So this is just a salary contingency or just our broad contingency?
This is just the portion of the salary of the contingency that is allocated towards salary
Right, okay.
or non-union.
And these are just everyone's agreed upon.
Right. So these are the
Just
non-union.
Make sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good questions? Okay, motion to approve. Chris, second. Michael, all in favor?
And I'm gonna abstain because I didn't see that.
Yep. All approval, opposed? None, with one abstention. You got me off my game on that one. Thank you. So moved.
What was the reason you abstained?
I hadn't seen the materials.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
No, there was and he's.
Yes.
He's lying.
Remember.
Okay, and then you got the review?
The next transfer of the reviews, the list does get longer as we get towards the end of the year because we're just basically transferring funds between line items just to make everything, all the line items in the black. That's what is required by the audit. And essentially that's what we're doing with these transfers. And you'll see another series next month, and we usually are done by September just because things are still getting booked. And so by September rolls around, we're usually done. But that's what these are. We're moving lines, funds between lines, mostly within the departments. But there's some departments that we're moving funds from one department to another.
Questions, concerns, points of clarification? Anything else you need us to know?
No, I think it goes back to where we started with the discussion, where we're thinking we're going to end in the year on aggregate. We're ahead, and so this is just moving funds between the lines, but it's not changing the overall.
Okay, 2 quick items then. One is we have some open seats on committees. Do you happen to have that handy? in
I
terms
don't
of-
have it.
Okay.
Well,
It's one of
actually
the-
I do, but I can't get into.
All right,
my-
we need to circulate that. We need to get those filled by September. or sooner. So here's what I'd like to do. You could just send out
Sure.
the open seats with George having left in terms of what's seems to be filled, and then we'll ask, I mean, reach out, or if there's someone who's got some particular passion or interest in filling those open committee seats, I would ask you to let me know. Okay, so we'll get that out. Very important.
And you want to do at the same time, you want to make sure everybody wants to stay on what they're on or want to make changes.
Oh, no, I'm not
You don't
allowing,
wanna
we're not
do-
allowing any movement.
No, but I mean,
Okay,
it
of
might
course.
as well do it now.
Of course.
instead of
If
December.
someone would like,
Yeah,
I think ultimate veto problem, I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
Ultimate veto power on letting people off of certain.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, if people definitely want to rotate out or something, please let me know. Absolutely happy to do that. We'll have a lot of work.
and we'll need a volunteer for Board of Ed to replace George. That's a primary, but so it's hard.
That's that, and then a question for you. While our OPEB funding is very good comparatively, our pensions are much better, of course. We'll be getting a report on all that probably in September, October.
Right, I spoke to Dan, I believe Vanguard is scheduled to come.
I'd like a question answered, and the question is, given rates, is now an interesting time. I won't say good or bad. I'm not looking for, just saying it's something to consider to do a taxable bond to fund the underfunded OPEB. And I know the rule of thumb would be,
You and I have had this discussion.
why would you want to do that? For some reasons, rates would be higher. I think we've proven our returns substantially exceed the rates, and the risk is pretty low. It's an idea, just for this committee to evaluate whether or not would that be something that would be worth doing to really. It's not even a big hole. I know none of us lose any sleep over it. But on the other hand, it's something we could put in there. And I don't know what 2 million or 4 million does to put a plug in there, but it might be something for us. We should at least evaluate that as an option. If we think it's a bad idea, it's a bad idea. But I've heard of others doing that, and I've actually spoken to somebody about it, and it's worth for this group to evaluate. Okay, so I'd like if you could maybe bring that to us in September with a little, just kind of a little analysis around it. I know you've got experience in that.
I mean, just in context of OPEB funding, I haven't seen a town that has higher OPEB funding.
Yeah. No, we're not. I think we're second.
We're second
That's okay.
now. but we've always been
I know.
high.
I know, it's at 62% or something.
extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, but it's still a liability, it's still an
It's still-
unfunded
yeah,
liability, let's be honest. I know we're great and it's great, but you know what, it's an unfunded liability. If we have a chance right now, we can look back 20 years from now and be very glad that we did that for taxpayers. So it's just something to look at. Like I said, we'll take a look. Okay. That's it, I believe. So I need a motion to adjourn and go into executive
No, you
session.
don't adjourn. You're gonna go to executive session,
Yeah.
like guests in, and there's not gonna be a vote, but when you come out of the executive session,
Yeah.
we'll take a vote. to adjourn that.
Right, okay. So do I do need a motion to go into
Go into
executive
executive
session?
session, and,
Okay.
and Lundo and Tucker and Tiger and myself will join you.
Okay, yep.
Okay, let me stop
Linda,
recording.
Tucker, Tiger, and that's it. Any other items?
So you do it
Okay.
again.
All right, so motion to adjourn.
So move.
Amy, second.
Second.
Second. Chris, all in favor? Aye, opposed? None? So moved.
Hallelujah.
We are adjourned. 8:34.
Not bad.